Hello, and welcome back to David Starkey Talks. After, I'm ashamed to say, a rather longer gap than there should have been. Not that I have been exactly idle. Those of you who have been keeping up with the channel will know that I've been travelling quite a bit, in particular to Budapest, and you'll have seen the lecture that I gave there. You'll have also realised what took me there, which is, of course, the quest for what do we mean by conservatism? Particularly, what do we mean by Anglo-American, English conservatism? Where does it come from? How long has it been in existence? Is it a matter of great thinkers? Is it a question of tradition? Does it date just from Burke and the reaction to the French Revolution? I've been researching, pondering and writing on all of those things. However, my job now is to answer not my questions, what is conservatism, but your questions, or at least to begin to answer the backlog, for which again I'm very sorry. So let's begin actually with Hanneke. Now, do I pronounce the final E in Nieste? Forgive me. In Arnhem in the Netherlands. And Hanneke raises a very interesting question on what most of us now just regard as an absolutely central part of our mental furniture, don't even begin to think about, which is the notion of right and left in politics. Left, of course, social justice, liberty, equality, fraternity, right, tradition, duty, obligation, conservatism. But of course, all ideas are human. Therefore, all ideas are invented. Therefore, they are products of history and time and circumstance. This is really rather interesting, isn't it? The notion of the left, with its idea of universalism, with its idea of universal values, which are timeless in some way or another, and supposedly outside the actual constructs and constrictions of any particular society. Well, the idea of the left is itself a historical creation. It's a historical creation of a specific moment, literally of a specific place, actually of a building, of rather a temporary structure, of something as mundane as a seating plan. Because the terms left and right in politics really are, in the my little meandering introduction when I was talking about my quest for conservatism and the question, does it antedate the French Revolution or is it merely a reaction to it? Well, one thing is absolutely certain. The terms right and left, with of course also the sense that politics is fundamentally a matter of ideological division, they are genuinely a result of the French Revolution. They are a result specifically of the body that was first of all elected as the Estates General, the first time the Estates General in France, and roughly the Parliament, had met since the beginning of the 17th century. That was for pushing 100 and whatever it is, 170, 180 years. And originally, of course, the estates, the three estates, the first estate of the clergy, the second estate of the nobility, and then the third estate, the bourgeoisie, the representatives, vast bulk of the population, all three sat separately, and with a little bit of jiggery-pokery, the king and his councillors were able to manipulate them, play one off against the other. So it was an extraordinarily important feature of the first days of the assembly in 1789 that it resolves to sit not separately but together. And it is that decision to sit together which really triggers the revolution, which begins the, what of course Burke again, Burke quickly recognizes as the tsunami of revolution, the inevitable drift to extremes. But it also, because of the way the seating plan was organized, gives birth to the terms right and left. In the center, you had the president, the abbés, and then banked round in a horseshoe you had the seating of the members. And the practice very quickly developed that those on the president's right were the more conservative, those who sat on his left were the more radical, and the most radical of all were those who sat at the top, who later became known as the montagnards, the mountain. And in the middle, of course, because it's a horseshoe, you've got the centre. So you there have, in the actual seating plan of what becomes known as the convention, the National Assembly, it undergoes many shifts of titles with the extraordinary revolutionary violent switchback of the French Revolution. There, in the very seating plan of a building, you actually have the origins of so much modern political language. The right, the left, the centre right, the centre left, and so on. And that pattern of horseshoe seating becomes pretty well entrenched for all the multitudinous assemblies that are set up in the course of the various liberal reforms, liberal revolutions of 19th century Europe. And indeed, when I was in Budapest, I was in one of them, the most famous building in Budapest now, I suppose apart from the castle and the great basilica of St. Stephen, is the magnificent Parliament building, very closely modelled on the Parliament building of London, of Westminster. It too, right, the one in Budapest, again, it rises from the river, it rises from the Danube, and it's originally constructed very, very closely on the Westminster model. There is a huge circular lobby in the middle, and at one end there is the chamber that was for the Hungarian nobility, and at the other there are the representatives of the Hungarian House of Commons. Both chambers have this horseshoe pattern, and there I was listening to this discourse on the Hungarian Parliament a few weeks ago when I was in Budapest. And now, of course, it's a unicameral legislature, and one of the chambers is unused for most of the time. But there it is, that horseshoe pattern. If you actually look at Britain, however, this language doesn't penetrate, or rather, it's very, very slow to penetrate. The terms right and left, as terms of political discourse, do enter English, and you'll find them in the supplements and the revisions to the Oxford English Dictionary published in the 1930s. But they're completely specific. It says these terms, right and left, centre right, centre left, and so on, apply to continental legislatures. In other words, it's over there. It's not British. This is as late as the 1930s. Now, why the extraordinary resistance in Britain, in England, in Westminster? Well, I think there are two sets of reasons. One, of course, is that political divisions in 19th century Britain were of a significantly different kind from that of continental Europe. But more importantly, by the way, the utter confidence of the editors of the Oxford Dictionary, this is a term that applies to continental legislatures. Let me get my tongue around that. Legislatures. Dear me, I'm developing a speech impediment. That will never do. To continental legislatures. So that ease, that sense, it's something that's across the channel. Why not England? Well, again, look what I began with. I began with the physical facts of seating. See, this again is something we don't want to, we find so difficult to adjust to. The fact that abstract ideas very often, in fact, I would argue, usually have a completely concrete foundation. I mean, the famous story, legend or not, of the apple and Newton, the idea of gravity. From the falling of an apple, a thing produces an idea. That's the right way round. The catastrophe is the French, the Platonic, the Cartesian notion that the idea produces the thing, and that leads to very terrible trouble. But let's deal with it the right way around. The thing producing the idea. Well, the thing in this case are the seating patterns of the English legislatures. The English, let's get the word I can pronounce. The English Parliament. It's two houses: the House of Commons and the House of Lords. Now, in both of these, you don't have a horseshoe pattern. The chambers themselves are rectangular, and the Commons very narrow, because of the accident that in the reign of the Edward VI, the former magnificent royal chapel of St. Stephen was actually made over as the permanent meeting place of the House of Commons. So it's a chapel. So you've got the speaker roughly where the altar was, and the benches on either side, the bar of the House, and then cross benches at the bottom outside the bar of the House. The seating pattern of the Lords roughly similar, except that there were woolsacks in the centre for judges, clerks, other assistants, the Lord Chancellor himself, of course. Now, in both of and in the Lords, in theory, mostly for formal sessions of Parliament anyway, the King himself or his representative actually presides. Now, in both of these, there is indeed left and right seating, but it does not correspond at all to conventional political alignments, at least ideological ones. In the House of Lords, right through and including the Reformation, though there's a very significant change with one of the most important and most neglected pieces of legislation, the wonderfully named Act of Precedence of 1539, whose consequences, by the way, we saw as recently, consequences we saw as recently as in the Accession Council of King Charles III when he acceded to the throne in September. Anyway, the seating plan of the House of Lords was that there was right and left, but the right-hand side, that's viewed from the King's perspective, the right-hand side was the ecclesiastical side of the house, if you in French language, the first estate, with the bishops sitting at the front, and the abbots, the mitred abbots, until the dissolution of the monasteries in the 1530s, the Benedictine abbots in their black robes, but still their mitres, sitting at the back. And then the left-hand side of the house was for the lay nobility, except that until again the Act of Precedence of 1539 and the Reformation, whose political consequences it sorted out, but the top of the bench, the top of the left-hand bench, was reserved for the bishops, again, bishops of the diocese of the archdiocese, rather, of York. And the king, far from sitting alone in the centre of the upper bench of the was in fact surrounded by the Archbishop of Canterbury on his right hand and the Archbishop of York on his left. And the result, essentially, of the enormous secularization of politics, the large elimination of bishops from the King's Council and so on, the Act of Precedence of 1539 simplified that structure. It removed the bishops of the Archdiocese of York from the left-hand side of the House. It left the whole of the left-hand side of the House of Lords to the title peerage, and the bishops now, of course, shorn of the great numbers of mitred abbots who'd all been dissolved. They'd been abolished. The position had been abolished because the monasteries had been dissolved. Now on the right-hand side of the House, and the archbishops demoted from the bench on either side of the king simply to the top of the front bench on the right-hand side of the House. So in the Lords, then, the division is between the laity, the lay peers, and the bishops, or, in the formal language of an Act of Parliament, the Lords spiritual, that's the bishops, and the Lords temporal, that is all the nobility, dukes, marquesses, earls, viscounts, down to barons, and so on. Okay, so that's the pattern in the Lords, clearly. No room for a notion of left and right. Even in the Commons, there isn't, because in the Commons, as from the from the beginning of the 18th century, you're getting a sense of the government being firmly based, essentially in the House of Commons, the development of the office of Prime Minister, and so on. What you get there is the tradition that the government members, led by the government ministers, the Privy Councillors, who were of the ruling faction or party, sat on the right-hand side of the Speaker, and the opposition sits on the left. But of course, if the opposition wins and becomes a government, then the two swap. So you can see the notion of right and left in that sense doesn't correspond to the realities of English politics. So it's hardly surprising that as late as the 1930s, as late as the editions, as I said, of the Oxford English Dictionary and the Oxford Shorter English Dictionary, which are based on usage, you see the term being reserved for continental usage, the continental assemblies and so on. The change seems to come, in fact, the change certainly comes. In other words, the adoption of the terms right and left into British politics, it comes with the Spanish Civil War. It comes with the extraordinary ideological divide that the reaction to the Spanish War triggers. Of course, also in the background, the response to Russian communism and the extent to which the Republican cause in Spain is identified with communism. And it also comes, again, ideas, these strange things, incarnated in so many different ways. I think the key figure in the actual domestication of the term left is that extraordinary publisher Victor Gollancz. And Gollancz, of leftish disposition, flirting in and out with the Communist Party, an early publisher of George Orwell. He and Orwell had a great dispute over the text of The Road to Wigan Pier. Gollancz wants to eliminate the sections of Wigan Pier, which are also developed by Orwell in his wonderful essay on the Lion and the Unicorn, in which Orwell attacks the middle-class members of the Socialist Party for their crankery, their Quakerism, their veganism, their vegetarianism, their sandal-wearing, their awful shorts, their homosexuality, their general crankiness, and Gollancz, being an archetypical middle-class member of the left, wants that out and Orwell goes off and finds other publishers. But what Gollancz does in 1936, with the beginning of the Spanish Civil War, he founds, as a branch of his publishing, he founds the Left Book Club. And that idea of the left, embedded by a thing, by a publishing organization, with a journal, with lists of recommended reading, with campaigns and whatever, that begins the process of the firm entrenchment of first the idea of the left and then the right into I think, more broadly speaking, the politics not simply of Britain, but of the English-speaking world. So, Hanneke, thank you very much for asking that question. Again, what I love about these things is that a kind of reasonably innocent query can open up layer after layer after layer. But this one is particularly interesting, as I said, because of the way it brings out the thinginess of ideas, the fact that political ideas are rooted in place, in physical structures. The physical structures, in this case, of seating in one kind of assembly, the horseshoe shape of the continental legislatures and assemblies, that shape in England, and the very different role of the division. Again, the fact that something is apparently accidental as one man, a publisher, a book club, can coin a term, of course, which then acquires profound resonance because of the contemporary circumstances, the extreme ideological divides of the 1930s. So, right and left. Hello, and thank you for watching David Starkey Talks. If, as I very much hope, you're enjoying them, why not become more actively involved and join my members club? As a member, you'll be able to take part in the members-only weekly question and answer session, suggest topics for forthcoming videos, and have priority booking for my forthcoming live events. And while you're at it, why not have a look at the store page on my website, davidstarkey.com. There you can purchase t-shirts and other merchandise, buy signed copies of my books, and, if you're feeling brave and a bit flush, even arrange to take me out to lunch. Thank you once again for watching. I look forward to hearing from you and to welcoming you to my members club.